Right. Okay. Hi, everyone. Sorry. Come, Jeffrey. The rest of us are all politicians. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Allegra Spender, the federal member for Wentworth. And today I'm talking about the Better Value for Taxpayers bill that I've just introduced into the Parliament. This is about integrity, and this is about inflation, and this is about the economy. Because the community of Wentworth is sick to the back teeth of having big announceables by the major parties that are bad value for the taxpayer, are driving up inflation, and are actually just about them winning elections, not about actually getting value for the Australian community. The election hasn't been even called, and already we have the major parties running around the country spending billions of dollars like Santa Claus, but the problem is it's our money. It's the same story every election, no matter who's in government. If it's sport-rorts, car park rorts, if it's about the suburban rail loop, the Australian taxpayer deserves better. And that's why I've introduced this bill. Now, I was pretty surprised when I came to Parliament that we didn't have better discipline around spending, because this bill's pretty simple. It says, one, let's have a 10-year plan on how we're going to spend the $120 billion worth of infrastructure spending we have. Secondly, let's make sure that there's a business case for this that stacks up and that is public. Thirdly, when the costs blow out, the minister has to come back to Parliament and justify what's going on. And when the costs blow out over the long term, we have to know what those numbers are, so that next time we don't believe what the minister says it will only cost this amount of money. That's the simple kind of disciplines. In the real world, in the private sector where I spent most of my career, the sort of business discipline that this bill is asking for, that you only put forward things that are actually going to be beneficial to the country, that's going to be value for money, that's going to have integrity. I thought that would happen in this Parliament. It doesn't happen, and frankly, both the major parties are equally bad at making sure these pieces happen. So for me, this is about backing what the Australian people want. We know that we are putting too much infrastructure spending into the economy right now. That's actually helping drive up inflation. We need to be pulling that back, and we need to give money to those projects that need it the most, because that's what matters. And these higher inflation costs, they're actually making housing more expensive. I've been talking to builders, and they're saying it's all this public infrastructure that's there to win people elections that are actually costing, which is actually driving up the cost of building businesses. Now, people are frustrated that the Labor Party is overspending. They're also frustrated that the coalition isn't serious when they say they're about actually more effective spending. And I'm calling on both the major parties to back this, because the Australian people expect when you spend our money, when you spend the Australian taxpayers' money, it's actually good for the country, not good just for the election of these major parties. I'd like to hand over to Jeffrey Watson, SC, who's from the Centre of Public Integrity on this bill.
I find it astonishing that we're here talking about this. This is just bizarre. This is just sensible, open government to produce these sorts of materials so the business case, the strategy case can be examined. Now, it's not happening. We're not talking about millions of dollars. We're talking about billions of dollars. And if you think there isn't a genuine problem, you are wrong. There was an independent study into the pipeline infrastructure projects proposed by the last government. And the independent study said that 82 of them should be rejected upon grounds that they weren't either substantiated by a business case or weren't worth the outcome. We're just talking about something simple here, something which is designed to get the best result in the sense of getting the funds, using them most efficiently on the projects where they're most needed. That's not asking for too much. This bill should be welcomed by the government, by the coalition.
I find it extraordinary that this isn't already a thing. The fact that you can spend billions of dollars with no business case, I think it would be a huge surprise to most Australians. This is not a radical idea. It's just asking for some very basic accountability. And what we see now in pork barrelling season is one side says it will do some local project. The other side then tries to neutralise any political effect that has by saying it will also commit to that project. then you end up with bipartisan support for a project that may or may not actually make sense. I think all taxpayers deserve better. They deserve to know that government is thinking very carefully about how we spend money and proving that it's actually worth it. Another part of this fantastic bill says that we should actually have a look and do evaluations after we roll these projects out and determine did they deliver on what they said that they would deliver, so that we can actually learn over the long term and make better infrastructure decisions, know what we're getting ourselves into when we sign up for big projects, and become better at governing. So these seem like really fundamental changes, really simple changes that are fundamental to good governance. And it would be nice to hear either side of Parliament actually coming forward and explaining why they don't think we should have to have business cases for infrastructure investments.
So tonight in my electorate of North Sydney, there will be an extraordinary council meeting where the North Sydney Council is discussing whether or not they should actually double the local rates for North Sydney residents. Why? Well, because basically back in 2019, the then Liberal government pork-barreled my seat with a grant of $10 million from a regional sporting grant fund to upgrade the North Sydney pool, which, let me tell you, is not so regional. The fact of the matter is that by throwing that money into my electorate at that time, they completely derailed that project. Prior to that blatant political commitment, that was a project that was well defined, the business case had been created, and the council did have the money to get that work done. It was about concrete cancer in the stand. With $10 million currently being thrust into the coffers of that council, they suddenly ran amok. The project scope blew out, and we're now looking at a project that is going to cost my community in the vicinity of $160 million. It's no wonder the council is now turning to residents to say, we're really sorry, this is not an issue of our creation, but we're going to have to double your rates to try and pay for that project. Pork barrelling must stop. You wouldn't spend money like this at home. You wouldn't spend money like this in your own businesses. For us as voters to continue to allow our government to spend our money in this way is completely incomprehensible and irresponsible. And I thank, yet again, the crossbench for championing an issue like this, which the rest of us know is just plain common sense. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank the member for Wentworth for bringing forward, yet again, a very common sense bill that, as Geoffrey Watson said, is astonishing that we don't already have. The member for Wentworth is wanting to establish guardrails into our major infrastructure spend to ensure that it measures up for efficiency and fairness and value for money. Guardrails, I think most of us would need a mouth guard because it is gobsmacking that we don't already have such legislation in the Parliament. So I thank her for that. And I also thank the member for North Sydney for pointing out the egregious slap in the face to regional Australia, who are trying to cool off in a puddle in many small towns, while the former coalition government pork-barreled their way into the North Sydney pool. And I've said to the member for Sydney many times, when that pool's finally finished, I'm coming down to do a great big bomb off the lower diving board, because it is a dog of a thing and a bomb of an act that consecutive governments and oppositions pork-barrel their way to victory across this nation. Now, we've got the Leader of the Opposition out there right now trying to do an Elon Musk and set up a ministry or a Department of Government Efficiency. Well, I would say should insert a D in this, because the first thing we should do is get rid of the dodgy deals that happen with the major parties when they try to buy votes across this nation by spending taxpayers' money. If we instigated this bill and my bill around ending pork barrelling, we'd see a nation that spent fairly and smartly. And honestly, in a time where the whole nation is experiencing the cost of living pressures that they are, and mums and dads are sitting around kitchen tables sharpening their pencil and working out what they can and can't afford, to know that we're coming into another election with major parties spending like drunken sailors around this place and not even giving us infrastructure projects that in many cases will see the light of day for years to come. Do some planning, do some efficiency, do some honest dealing with the people of Australia and deliver for us the infrastructure that we truly need, that will set us up for a future that we truly want. So I thank again the member for Wentworth for her fine work.
I won't say too much, but once again, thank you to the member of Wentworth and all the backup here from the independents, as we do. We've actually got the common sense up here. We actually care about people and about where your money is going. If you look at what's going on in Tasmania at the moment, we have this proposed stadium that's got to have a roof over it, $1.1 billion it's been estimated to cost. I can tell you what happened. The previous Premier, he went out and he had a few frothies with the AFL. They did no consulting over this stadium and decided we were going to blow this away. But not only did both the major parties get involved in this, Anthony Albanese, off the back, he's such an idiot, has said, yes, I'm going to chuck some money at this stadium as well. Oh my God, watch this election, because the election in Tasmania will be all over the AFL stadium with a roof over it, that you have no social conscience. 3/4 of Tasmanians have come out and said very clearly, we do not want this new stadium. We have a perfect stadium that is in Launceston, that is at West Park. A perfect stadium where we can spend about 1/10 of that money there. And in the meantime, in Tasmania, on the public waiting list, I have 5,000 people, 5,000 families waiting for a roof over their head. So are you ready? You boys be ready down there for the next federal election, because I'm telling you, that stadium is the one that's going to bring you unstuck. Watch this space.
Very hard to follow Helen Haynes and Jackie Lambie, but want to echo my thanks to Allegra Spender for this bill, and also Dr. Helen Haynes for her tireless work to end pork barrelling. Canberrans know what it's like to live in a jurisdiction where you basically have safe seats and you get overlooked because you're not marginal. And we need to move to funding being distributed on a needs basis. After all the criticism that Labor gave the Coalition over the last 10 years, one of the things that they did to deal with it was to tell the Department of Infrastructure, you cannot report infrastructure spend by electorate. That'll solve it. People just won't know. We deserve better than that. And again, this is a choice between two major parties that do the same thing. They protest in opposition, they get in there and they do the exact same thing in government. And we need to do better. And the crossbench is showing the way forward.
Any questions? Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I think that it's not really about that, but what it is about good government, right? This is about saying, in any business around this country, if you're making big investments, you look after you've made that investment, how much did it cost you, and did you get the benefit you expected from that? And that is absolutely the minimum that a business would expect, and that should be the bare minimum that this country should expect from governments. And you saw that with Anthony Albanese when he was the shadow infrastructure minister. He tried to introduce a bunch of these sorts of controls into the parliament as a shadow minister, but when it comes to being in government, suddenly we don't need these issues. I do want to say that the government has in one of the reviews that's just been commissioned by the government, they identified 80 projects that shouldn't go ahead based on the information they have, but they haven't told us what those 82 projects are. They've told us 50 projects they want to cut. They haven't told us if those 50 are part of those 80 projects they want to cut. Like, this is about transparency of billions of dollars of money, because the government is currently, the infrastructure pipeline is currently $32 billion overspent. The projects are going to cost $32 billion more than they thought they would. And so this is really critical when you're looking at how do we actually manage the economy in a way that actually doesn't drive inflation and is responsible to the Australian taxpayer. Look, I think there was a record in that by-election. There was a record low for the major parties and a record high for other parties. And I think that talks to dissatisfaction. And I was out in my community yesterday, talking to different people in Wentworth, and across the board, people are concerned about the cost of living. They are really concerned about the cost of housing, and how to, bring down the cost of construction, because that's a real barrier to getting more housing in. And part of that is like making sure that the government doesn't make it harder by pushing infrastructure that's too expensive. And that's what we're seeing right now. People want to see real action on government waste, but it has to go beyond cancelling welcomes to country. It's got to go into the heart of government spending and heart of making every dollar really work for the Australian taxpayer. Yeah, sure.
Sorry. We don't know how the 2025 election is going to roll out, but what we do know is that nearly a third of all seats in the lower house have announced their intention to run a community independent in the election, whenever we see it this year. Now, people are doing that because they are frustrated and fed up with the two-party system that sees us gridlocked around what should be necessary long-term reform. What they've also seen from this 47th Parliament is that you get long-term reform when you have a big crossbench that actively engages with the government to improve legislation, push them forward, and continue to call them out to have more courage and ambition. I fully expect to see the 2025 Parliament be a place where there is balanced politics, where one of the major parties is actually forced to work with a sensible movement, centre movement, on the crossbench to finally bring the leadership that Australians want to see, the integrity that Australians want to see, the accountability that Australians want to see. Because at the end of the day, it's the crossbench who represents normal people in this place, while the parties continue to represent themselves.
Look, I think it's treating the Australian public as mugs into say, on both sides to not have good costings. And I think this coming back to this bill, I'm going to be writing to both the leader, to the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition, and say, these are pretty simple things to commit to. Is that make sure that before you go ahead, that there's a decent business case, that you come back to the Parliament if it overruns, and that we have a costing on the back of it to see actually how much it costs so we can learn from it next time. These are really basic disciplines that any business would have, and it's remarkable that we don't actually have this already in the Australian parliamentary system. So I think this is really critical, and this is what I think the Australian community really expects. They don't think it's serious, and then people just assume that this is happening already, but the truth is it's not.
I wouldn't mind adding to that. I think when you see announcements without costings, it's really clear that whoever is making that announcement is more interested in the headline than actually what it does for the country. And every policy decision is about trade-offs. And if you don't have the costings, then you're not deciding what trade-offs that you're making for those. So I think Australians would actually like to see greater transparency on how much things cost. That might be policy announcements in the lead up to election, but it's big infrastructure projects that we're all paying for. And you're not going to hear that message from either party looking for more transparency and more accountability, which was why we in the middle need to get up and actually hold both sides to account so that anything that is announced is actually costed.
I'll just add one more thing about that, because it was the crossbench in the last minority government that called for and had established the Parliamentary Budget Office. There's no excuse for putting forward a policy position or indeed any offer to the Australian people that's not costed. We on the crossbench, I do it. I go to the Parliamentary Budget Office when I have a policy idea and seek out their expertise in what it will cost. And again, I think the Australian people are smart. So anyone listening should ask themselves each time that they hear something from the major parties around a policy position or indeed an infrastructure project is, show us your figures.
Question on something totally different. Donald Trump's imposing steel and aluminium tariffs hasn't exempted Australia. So far, there's a long way to go, but we have 4 MPs here, so I thought I would ask the question, does it raise any concerns for anyone here about the Australian alliance with the US, given that we're incurring the cost of these tariffs, even when we're does it raise any concerns about where the world is going with Donald Trump?
So, look, Australia is an open trading nation. Our economy depends on world trade, and that's critical to our economic interests. You know, we should be concerned that what Donald Trump has done, but as you said, it's early days. So I think, you know, he's announced things and moved back. So I think we just have to see, and I think have very sort of robust discussions about what is in the interest of this country, but also what is in the interest of America, because we know that we have, you know, and you know, they get a lot of value from the Australian relationship, and that's one that I think we need to be really asserting very, very clearly. And you know, I think Australia should be super clear that our interests, our economic interests, are about open trade, and that's what we need to continue to pursue through all sort of in our diplomatic relationships and other areas. Yeah, thank you very much. Oh, sorry, to Kate.
No, I think when it comes to what's currently happening in America at the moment and how it may potentially impact us, I think it's really important that all Australians remember we did see moves like this back in 2018, and that our trade delegates worked really hard to ensure that we were exempted from them when they came to be. We will know more about what the President is actually going to declare within 24 hours. But the other thing for Australians to take heart in is that there is a booming market for our steel and for our aluminium. And at the end of the day, if America doesn't want it, we will find other markets that are prepared to pay for it. So I think it's early days. Australians need to hold the line and have confidence in our exports. And we also need to have confidence in the people who represent us in these market negotiations, because they've shown us before that they have been able to navigate these choppy waters.